Every generation has a task to rebel and to challenge the generation before.
Hello, my name's Amy. I am the co-founder of an environmental education charity called Kids Against Plastic, and I'm a young fellow of the RSA. It's an absolute privilege to be joined for this in conversation by Hannah Jones. Now, following a 22-year stint at Nike, during which she was the vice president of Nike's Innovation Labs and Nike's chief sustainability officer, Hannah became the CEO of the Earthshot Prize back in 2021, which is an initiative founded by Prince William's Royal Foundation that aims to support environmental solutions around the world. Now, Hannah, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and find out more about the Earthshot Prize from your perspective, and also your views on sort of the intersection between environmental action and business. And I think it would, be a great place to start to really find out from you about your time working in the business sector and kind of what your greatest successes and also frustrations were, in your view, from your time as a Chief Sustainability Officer.
Thank you, and it's lovely to be here with you on this amazing rooftop, by the way, with some great plant action. So I joined Nike in 1998, and if you go back in time, 1998, there was really almost no talk of sustainability. There was a little bit of talk. John Elkington, who was one of my mentors, remains a great friend, had just brought out Cannibals with Forks and had just started to talk about something called the triple bottom line. But otherwise, there were no courses at university, there was no playbook to be followed. And I came to Nike at a very difficult time for the company, which was when it was facing very significant accusations of labor rights issues in its supply chain. What was interesting about that is, in a way, it was the first time that the not-for-profit and the campaigning organizations had understood that if you focused a campaign on a business around their reputation and their consumers and what the consumers cared about, you might be able to create change for people in the supply chain or indeed on any issue. And when I came in, it was a very conflictual time, and again, really no playbook for how the company should respond. I came in very clear that I wanted to be a part of change, and that I wanted a really big problem to solve, which was, with the team that I was working in, how could we solve the issue of labor rights? And for the next 6 years, out of Europe, Middle East and Africa, I found myself literally crawling through factories, talking to workers, talking to management, and beginning to see that beneath this globalized supply chain, we had collectively, the industry as a whole, the world with globalization as a whole, had fundamentally externalized social and environmental impacts from business. So business was in the business of doing business, as they used to say. It was all about the bottom line, and it was all about profit and loss. And nobody was talking about the environment, and no one was talking about people. And yet it seemed to us in the team, the corporate responsibility team that was doing that work, that in a way the gift we'd had by coming to work at Nike, and for Nike being attacked so publicly, was two things. One was that Nike decided, well, we're actually going to tackle this. We're not going to just try and do a PR thing. And two, that it meant that Nike actually gave us a chance to be ahead of the curve on something that we thought would become a license to operate. Fast forward, and in about 2005, I remember there were droughts in Bangladesh and India. And I remember how those droughts meant that the rice supplies were fundamentally diminished. There was a real shortage of rice. And very quickly, India and Bangladesh began to put in tariffs and quotas and not ship out the rice, and the price of rice went up. And the women workers in our supply chain couldn't afford rice, that was their staple food. And what that was the wake-up call for the collective team to say, labor rights are incredibly important, and climate change will define all of our futures. And the people that are the most vulnerable will be the ones impacted first. And we really pivoted our strategy to be about how do we show up in a world where climate change is becoming a reality. And it unlocked enormous amounts of work for us that became really exciting work, but also very hard work, around realizing we needed to move in collaboration like never before with others, and that we needed to look at our footprint environmentally and start to try to get out of being an emitter of carbon, having waste through our supply chain, thinking about chemistry, thinking about clean water. These were things that nobody came to business knowing how to deal with chemistry and clean water, so we had to build a whole new set of capabilities for that. And when I became Chief Sustainability Officer, I think we kind of made the title up. So I was one of the first ever Chief Sustainability Officers. And again, there was no job description. I mean, I have a philosophy degree. It's not really a very useful degree in any of this. Nowadays, there are people way more qualified to be Chief Sustainability Officers than I was. And it was the most incredible experience. And it's really shaped how I think about the world today.
Absolutely, I can imagine, and it must be quite almost a daunting but rewarding task to be someone in such like a trailblazing position, to be someone like a first Chief Sustainability Officer. And I suppose sort of looking back on your time at Nike, and also from your position now, obviously being part of the Earthshot Prize, and looking at where business is today, do you think that the corporate sector is where it needs to be now in terms of its sustainability transition, thinking how much it's changed since you first went into the business sector, or do you think it's a bit of a way behind?
What I would say is, compared to it, we always have to look at change through a rear view mirror. Mm-hmm. So if you look back to when I began, we're way ahead. That's the good news. The bad news is we're not nearly where we need to be. And the reason for that is, despite significant leadership and courage amongst some corporations, it's not uniform that all corporations are thinking about how to become net zero in the right timeline and how to reduce their impact. And fundamentally, what's not serving corporations is the business model and the financial incentives that sit within our global systems. And as long as the financial systems incentivize the short term and profit over everything and unlimited growth, there's a fallacy and a myth of unlimited growth. It makes what corporations do individually, makes it very hard for them to go beyond making today a little bit less bad, instead of actually building businesses that are all good. And we see some breakthrough organizations, companies trying to do that. We see things like B Corps. We see purpose-driven companies that are really thoughtful about what they're doing. And yet they all face those financial incentives of the public markets that make it incredibly hard to do the right thing and the brave thing in the time that we have. So I'd say, compared to 1998, it's amazing. And I see so many people so passionate about this and so knowledgeable about sustainability and working in corporations. I see boards waking up. I see regulators starting to regulate, not always in time and not always well. But from where we need to be, we need a turbocharge of courage.
That's the innovation, I think, is the really exciting bit, looking to the future. Because I think sometimes when we talk about climate change and we hear, for example, like you said, the UN reports yearly on the progress that we're making or, not making, it can sometimes feel a bit doom and gloom and a bit depressing, and just thinking we're so far away from being where we need to be. But that innovation side of it is almost the really exciting bit, isn't it? It's the bit that makes you hopeful for what's coming next. And we'll get on to the Earthshot Prize, a bit later in our conversation. But just on that note of encouraging that innovation, how do you think we can support agency and really create spaces within society and in business to encourage people to be the innovators, and especially encourage young people to kind of get involved and help to influence the trajectory of society and business and really the world that they live in?
Well, look, I live in a place of what we call urgent optimism, and I have done for a long time. One of the things we did when I was back at Nike was, for the first 15 years or so, or 10 years or so, we really were looking at the world through the lens of risk. We were looking at it going, we have to decrease risk, we have to figure out solutions that will make it less bad. And when we flipped and said, let's think about this as an innovation opportunity as opposed to a risk challenge, that reframe opened up a new mindset in the company. And suddenly it became exciting. And suddenly designers and creators and innovators began to compete with each other and share with each other and say, hey, I'm going to bring out a shoe that's better than your shoe because it's going to be completely recycled. And like, actually, no, I'm going to invent a new glue that doesn't use solvents, that's going to be totally water-based and that LeBron can play basketball with on the main court. And crazy stuff where people are like, you got to be crazy, that can't happen. And of course, tell a designer or a creative that they're crazy and it can't happen. And what are they going to go do? They're going to go make it happen because people are super creative and ingenious and determined. And that spark of changing people's mindsets about how to view this as an opportunity, as a place of creativity, that's the unlock that I think we all need. So with the Earthshot Prize, we have thousands of nominations coming in. And so every single day, the team and I are like jumping around going, oh my gosh, someone's come up with this solution and someone's come up with this solution. And this is the future, because right now what we're doing is we collectively hold the pen of history. Right now we are writing history. Maybe it's the first draft, as they always say, but ultimately we're making history happen. If you go back in time to these huge waves of transformation, it is the people that dared to think differently and create new that became the leaders of that future movement. Even just go back to, in my lifetime, probably not in yours, moving into digital and internet. You think about Silicon Valley. You think about the Harvard dropouts that built Google in a garage and, Meta somewhere else. And now they are, whether we like it or not, kind of at the leadership level of technology. My challenge and the opportunity I put out to everybody that I meet is, do you want to have FOMO and have missed the boat because you weren't busy trying to think about how to be entrepreneurial and creative about fixing the planet? And by the way, aligning your sense of purpose to something that you could do with your life? Do you want that? Or do you want to be a part of the greatest transformative movement in the world that's going to be all about that sort of creativity unleashed?
I think a lot of businesses like Innocent, like Oatly, they kind of have that reputation among younger people for being quite forward thinking. They're ones that tend to have also a social strategy that's quite unique and engages sort of a new consumer market with their business, which is also interesting to see how that intersects with their sort of core business focus. But I sort of wonder, how do we show more young people that business has a role to play in this? Because I think that we see so many of, you mentioned the dinosaurs in business, who almost, I think, give a view and a perspective that business is behind and business is working against the environmental movement. And obviously we still see examples of that today. It's still happening. How do we demonstrate to young people that business, it could be a way for them to actually pursue something that's really innovative and really change making? Because, even these most forward-thinking businesses still have their own problems to contend with. Even Nike, you mentioned you came in when there was the labour scandal back in the late 90s. There've been recent accusations again about, not paying workers in the Far East about, a fair wage. So how do we kind of prove that business is a place where innovation can happen? And is it really?
Well, I'm not in the business of proving a business that's not what my job is. I think what I'm really interested in your question about is this idea of how do you give young people a sense of agency? So I think that right now, I am so tired of the narrative of doom and gloom and your generation is doomed that's going on around. And I have a deep anger with older people for daring to put out a narrative that basically drives youth anxiety, youth anger, and youth apathy. Because it's not true. Like, every generation has a task to rebel and to challenge the generation before. And we need this young generation to do that on steroids and to be completely irreverent about what has come before. And this generation and every generation has choices and has agency. So number one, vote. We've just come through 2 elections in Europe right now. I include the UK in Europe, but that's a whole other conversation. Vote. Your vote really matters. The vote that's going to happen in America in November is absolutely game-changing to policies. If you get one government in, you will not get the kinds of policies that we need to take things to scale. If you get the other one in, you will. It's pretty binary. So number one, you have agency, use your vote and make sure that you're voting for the planet and people. Number two, you have a decision. How am I going to use my life and my talent in service of what? You get to choose. You get to choose whether you're going to go work for a company that you think is either good, indifferent, or bad. You're going to get to choose whether you're going to be an entrepreneur or a creative that's going to be part of a movement. You get to choose. Choose wisely. Choose bravely. Choose where you can put purpose at the heart of everything you do, because you will be so much happier, whatever happens, however hard the journey is. And there's a third area that you have choice in as well as a young person, and that is how you decide to live your life on a daily basis, from what you drink to what you eat to the clothes you buy. Those choices do matter. You may think, oh, but I'm just a small piece of this whole thing. It really matters. Let's take vintage clothing and secondhand clothing. You know, way back in the day, 10 years or 7 years ago at Nike, I was like, hey, I see something happening here. It's called resale and stock new, buying old trainers. And I remember people in the company were like, buying old trainers? How disgusting. Couldn't possibly. That's revolting. Who would even think of wearing a sweaty apparel thing? Then you see StockX. I don't know what they were valued at last time, but StockX is the resale for sneakers. They were like a 6 billion revenue within half a minute, it felt like. All of us now think that secondhand and vintage is the coolest thing you could possibly do. That really matters when you look at the fashion industry and the signal that all of us are sending together. So, it's the old Margaret Mead expression. Never doubt what a group of committed citizens can do together. Everything you do has a ripple effect. So that's how I'd reframe it, which is this is the most exciting opportunity in front of us. We are in a race, and there's a lot to be worried about. And there is hope, and because of how much innovation you and generations around you can actually help push in the next years.
That's, I think, amazingly well put, and it's something, that's really close to my heart, being someone that works with young people and a young person myself who's only just been able to vote for the first time in the last election. So it's, really encouraging to hear that perspective from you. And I think one of the things that I also hear a lot from young people is almost this feeling of, like you said, being a drop in the ocean, but almost feeling like you can't influence the big systems, you can't really influence politics, you can't really influence business. And I suppose, what would your message be to that? You've kind of touched on it already with this idea of, you're just a drop in the ocean, but together we can make real change. If there was one thing that you would recommend to someone as a young person who wanted to help shape the future of business, for example, to be more sustainable and to be more ethical, kind of what would that be?
It's all about your consumer choices, because those are the choices you take on a daily basis without thinking. When you walk into a coffee shop, are you choosing plant-based milk or are you choosing dairy? I mean, it's as micro decision as that. What we know is if the world moved to more plant-based foods and less meat and dairy, the impact on carbon is huge, which means the impact also on biodiversity is huge. If you say, I'm going to go to a second-hand store instead of a new store, you're making a choice. So how you live your life every day adds up. On the other side, these companies are paying for huge consumer insights programs to be done, going, where's the cutting edge of consumer going in the United Kingdom so we can make sure we're aligned with their values? It's like, oh, well, yeah, they're going to sustainability. And therefore, do you want to be on the side of your consumer, or do you want to be seen as a laggard on the side of the dinosaurs? So this is where I think shaping culture is actually a key component of this. And this is also where I think that music and art and film and storytelling is such a critical component of creating the new now, the new normal. If you think about every wave of successive art movement, if you go around the Tate, and you think about how what the Degas and what the Van Goghs were doing was seen as irreverent and ridiculous and crazy, and now it's high art. Every generation of art tells you that this generation has to disrupt the generation before, and that this generation, what was rebelling, becomes the new normal. So just apply that to how you think about culture as well, and think about what we demand be the new normal. that to me is where the young generation and all generations need to play and shape as well.
That's incredibly powerful, and I think so empowering as well, because people often feel like if we're not in positions of power, we don't have any power. And I think what you've said just demonstrates how that's completely not the case. And to focus on the Earthshot a bit more and to speak about that, what drew you away from working within business with Nike towards the Earthshot Prize and working kind of externally to business?
Well, I'd really fallen in love with innovation through the course of my journey with Nike. Really began to see that sustainability was primarily a massive innovation challenge, and that we needed more and more innovators and creators focused on fixing the planet one solution at a time. And then COVID hit. And to me, that was my first ever black swan event, which means, you know, that idea that from one day to another, the whole world could come to a full stop. And it made me sit back and realize that climate change would make COVID look like a walk in the park. And that I really, now was the time for me to start to look for a role where I could be helping turbocharge the innovation ecosystem around sustainability. So I kind of put that intention out into the universe quietly in my head, and nothing came back. I kept getting people phoning me for jobs that looked very much like the job I was doing, and I was like, I've kind of done the best CSO role in the world. I don't really want to do another one. I don't want to be in business anymore. And then I saw this job advert in The Economist. So note to self, always read the job adverts in The Economist, which made the prince laugh, because he's like, you found us in The Economist? And it said CEO of the Earthshot Prize. And I thought, that's interesting. I've never heard of that. And then I read a bit more and found out that it was really a new idea. And I was a bit worried, was this just going to be like an annual gala, or was this going to be a platform for system change? And in all the conversations, what became clear was the ambition for the Earthshot Prize was really huge, starting with our founder, the Prince of Wales. And so I signed up.
Wow, what a story. And I think it's always encouraging to see good things come from COVID, because I think it was such a dark time, and you said such a change, that to hear something positive come, and obviously the amazing role you have now and the change that you're making through the Earthshot Prize is really encouraging to see. And I think one of the things that I find really amazing about the Earthshot Prize is how diverse it is in terms of the people who win the awards each year, all around the world, different projects, and almost this core of looking at sustainability not from one lens, but actually as this not just one issue, but something that intersects with issues all around the world. And it intersects with, workers' rights, it intersects with inclusion, it intersects with, building ethical business. And I think that's so encouraging to see and to give a platform to, in an age where I think we still sometimes get stuck in viewing sustainability as its own problem. And I just wonder, how do you think we can translate that from the Earthshot Prize to more widely in society? Because I think it's such an important kind of principle to sustainability.
Yeah, it's a good observation, and we very much have designed the Earthshot Prize to be something that will spark the world's imagination wherever you are and whatever seat you sit in. And so that idea of diversity and representation is absolutely critical to how we think about how we search, how we select, and how we celebrate. So in terms of our selection process, we have official nominators around the world, and we task them with going out and finding solutions that are incredibly diverse. And we hold ourselves accountable to ensuring representation shows up throughout the process. So we make sure to not give an impression that sustainability is something that only these experts over here can do, but that it will come from everywhere and every kind of person. And that goes all the way through the selection process to that final cohort of 15 finalists and ultimately the 5 winners. We wrap a lot of storytelling around it deliberately, because we think that people in the mainstream narrative about the environment are being overwhelmed with stories of doom and gloom and despair and defeat and denial, whereas what we see are thousands of stories of possibility and opportunity and hope and optimism and determination and grit and human ingenuity at its best. And if one of those ideas can spark someone else across the world saying, gosh, I had no idea that you could make seaweed-based plastics and packaging. Why don't I go figure out how to create a seaweed farm or get in a lab and do something similar or different? Then we've done our job. So we focus on helping those 15 finalists and more nominees to scale their work by bringing funders and investors around them and putting stories around them. But really the ripple effect is, this could be you. How about, would you like one day to wake up and be an Earthshot finalist? How would that feel? That'd be pretty cool.
That would be, absolutely. And, you know, with all of those diverse projects and diverse people and just really innovative initiatives happening, what makes the winners, you know, because it must be so hard to decide between all the amazing things that people are doing, which are so different. What would you say it is that makes a winner of the Earthshot Prize really a winner?
So what makes an Earthshot finalist? So first of all, the solution that they've built needs to be proven. We need to have clear evidence that it works. And we do a lot of due diligence on that. We have Deloitte, our outside firm, helping us. We have expert advisors that are experts in that particular area of interest, focusing on all of them. We need to make sure that they're legal, that they've got the IP, you know, all those kind of boring things, but are really important. So does the solution work? Is it proven? Is it out and about? And is it showing traction? Secondly, if this solution were scaled or replicated, would it be transformative when you think about those big meta goals that we all have about reducing carbon, protecting marine and freshwater and nature? If it passes those two hurdles, then we start to get really interested. And then we start to narrow it down. And we have interviews, we have experts, we're comparing them to a portfolio of similar projects. Is this the best mangrove project in the world? Well, I don't know. Is it? I mean, that's a really hard question to ask. Is there such a thing as best when you're in an early stage of innovation? Sometimes you bet on multiple horses. You know, you think, well, this one might work and this one might work. So we should actually bet on both of them because you need one of them to win. And so as that goes through, then you start to look at the team. Because if a team is going to come on and be a finalist, they need to be ready to be on the global platform, and they need to be ready to be talking to potential investors and funders and scaling their work. It is a leadership challenge. It is a communications opportunity. It is a get up on the global stage and don't fall to pieces because you're so nervous. We're there to help you. And we actually wrap a fellowship program around the 15 finalists to give them all that support. But we have to have an indication that the team is solid, that the leadership is ready for this journey that we're going to take them on. And that's really what starts to narrow it down. And then the final magic twist is we absolutely look at diversity and representation. So we make sure that our cohorts are representative. We look specifically for female-led solutions, we look for indigenous-led solutions, and we look for global south-led solutions in particular. So that always plays out in how we select the cohort. And the final bit of magic is this an ingenious idea that's going to grab people's imagination because they're like, oh my gosh, I never thought of that.
So it's almost not just the project, it's the people as much as what they're doing.
Yeah, it has to be. There is a little bit of us that looks a bit like you would if you were investing in a portfolio of solutions as a VC even, where you're like, 50% of startups fail because the founders fall out with each other. So people matter. Yeah. The fact that people have got determination and grit and have come through some really difficult times together and still stuck it out, we take note of that.
And when you mentioned that inspiration aspect of the Earthshot Prize, you could just see that demonstrated through those people leading such innovative projects.
Absolutely.
And I'm just curious because, you've mentioned innovation quite a lot, especially when it comes to the Earthshot Prize. Do you think the world is almost ready for some of the innovations that we see happening with it? Because I'm just thinking, for example, with the seaweed plastics, I do a lot of work around plastics, and one of the key problems we see with alternatives to single-use plastic is that we just don't have the waste systems in a lot of countries in place ready to deal with these innovations, with these solutions that are coming through. So do you think that a lot of these projects might almost be sort of stuck trying to figure out how to work in the sort of out-of-date systems that we have in place, or do you think that they will play a role in accelerating them towards the transition to change that we need to see?
I think both are true. They're both going to hit walls and they're going to push and force change. And one of the things that we do more and more is, and seaweed is a great example, which is a bit of an obsession for me. So within oceans, we have a sub-focus on seaweed and kelp.
Yeah.
And what we mapped was we started seeing all these seaweed-based solutions coming in, either for creating seaweed farms or for creating products out of seaweed. And so we mapped the entire seaweed value chain, and we worked with one of our partners, Standard Chartered, to do a big piece of research on what's the opportunity just of seaweed in the world. And it's huge. I mean, not to geek out on this, but millions of jobs, tons and tons of carbon sinking, and marine biodiversity off the charts. But then importantly, the ability for seaweed as a feedstock to disrupt anything up to 5 industries. So it can disrupt packaging and plastics by taking fossil fuel out of packaging. It can take chemistry out of fertilizer by replacing chemicals. It can be a source of energy, a source of alternative protein, and the list goes on. So I'm like, we want seaweed to win. But to your point, it faces multiple hurdles. For example, is there a common standard about what a good seaweed farm looks like? Who's been investing in the R&D for processing plants and labs to create new products? So one of the things we've been doing is not just stopping at how do we support 15 finalists, we're also now convening coalitions of the willing to take courageous action and to run campaigns around certain sectors. Because we recognize we don't just want the one-off solution to win in seaweed, we want the whole seaweed sector to be the new sexy thing in town where everybody's talking about seaweed and wanting to invest in it.
Really?
So we've been in Wales, we just held an event in Wales, which there's a huge opportunity for seaweed in Wales. If you think about that incredible coastline, there's some great examples of it. But there's a role for everybody to come together and say, right, policymakers, local councils, we need you to do this. Money. We need investors and philanthropists. We need you to do this. Universities, we need you to help on the technical assistance and the capability building. Welsh community, we need you to get involved in this and understand the pluses for the coastal communities in terms of jobs. Let's come together. So more and more, that's the kind of work we're doing as well.
I think it's amazing how much potential such a seemingly small sector can have. Something like seaweed, which we don't really talk about when we talk about climate change in sort of mainstream narratives, can hold such potential to sort of make such a massive difference on this issue. And obviously the Earthshot Prize plays a really important role in highlighting projects like that, areas of focus that can really have an innovative, change on climate change. I just kind of wonder, when it comes to something like a prize, you mentioned some of the key things that make the Earthshot Prize different, but do you ever think that sort of the sensationalism that comes with a climate prize or an award, and almost the glitz and glamour and celebrities and that sort of focus of it, do you think that ever takes away from the key core of what those kind of events are about, especially when we look at the wider narrative that comes from covering an event like the Earthshot Prize?
So I think everything we do is very, very intentional. And the reason we have a glitzy, glamorous, prestigious prize that goes around the world to a different city every year is very thought through. And it's because we want to break through into the global mainstream narrative with a moment of hope and optimism in a news cycle of doom and gloom and defeat and denial. And so appropriating culture becomes really important. There was a conversation I was in very early in my job, I think it was week 1, and I was with the Prince and Bill Gates.
Wow.
On a sofa.
What an audience.
That's kind of like, well, okay, here we are. And we had just, it was actually a couple of months in, and we just held our first Earthshot Prize ceremony in Ali Pali in North London. And Bill Gates made an observation which I actually thought was super smart. He said, I wasn't quite sure, he's a partner of ours. He says, I was kind of thoughtful about why I would partner with you. And he said, but here's what I see. You got green hydrogen on the front cover of People magazine. And I thought, you know what? We did. And he said, I can't do that. And so it's an and. If we were only doing a ceremony, I think your question would be, why are you only doing a ceremony? And don't forget, it's our World Cup moment to break through a narrative and create a new narrative that touches people that wouldn't be in the environmental bubble that I think we've all been held hostage to for rather too long. But beneath the prize lies an entire flywheel of having impact, because impact is what drives us. We're really focused. Everything we do has to ladder up to impact. And impact has to be about speeding solutions to scale, has to be about inspiring young people with urgent optimism so that it leads to them wanting to grow up and become an Earthshot winner.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the inspiration being such a key part of the event, and to get something like green hydrogen on a cover of a mainstream magazine is pretty incredible.
I mean, really, the geek in me is still a bit stunned by that.
Absolutely. To take sort of like an alternative perspective on the Earthshot Prize, I think there's some obviously really, really incredible initiatives that have been recognised through it, been rewarded through it. But do you ever sometimes wonder about whether the prize is addressing sort of the symptoms of climate change and not the cause? Because I think there's some really amazing projects like the one in Kenya that was working with smallhold farmers to kind of reduce their environmental impact. But, you know, farmers in Kenya have never been the root cause of the climate crisis. They're not the key part of the problem. And whilst they can also play their role in reducing their emissions, people will say, well, you know, why are we focusing on those emissions and not the emissions that come from sort of the top key polluting organisations and companies? So yeah, I just kind of wanted to get your perspective on that, on whether you think that how the Earthshot Prize fits into this wider narrative about environmental action.
Yeah. Look, I think if we were 10, 15 years earlier, I'd be like, yeah, everything should be focused on the root cause. We are where we are. Mitigation, adaptation, like farmers in sub-Saharan Africa, farmers in the United Kingdom are dealing with the impacts of climate change right now. We have a fifth of British crops that have failed due to the adverse weather in the spring. No one's talking about it. That is a climate disaster unfolding in front of us. And the farmers' livelihoods and security, food security, is right there in the middle of us, and we're all watching it happen to us. So you have to be and. You know, I think the theme of this entire conversation is yes and. We have to be all things, and we have to be doing all things at the same time. We need to, you know, if I take Takachar, one of our winners from one of the earlier years, they work in Delhi, where they're working with subsistence farmers to offer an alternative to the burning of harvest stubble, to crop stubble. The crop stubble being burnt was the cheapest way for farmers to get their fields ready for the next crop, but it led to massive air pollution and carbon emissions. By giving them a cheap and viable alternative to how they could turn their stubble into fertilizer, they weren't just stopping all those problems, they were also putting money in the pockets of the farmers because it led to increased yield in their next crops. We have to do those things, and we need the 4401, which is one of our finalists, which is an alternative approach to carbon storage, and we need an alternative to diesel being used in building sites by mainstream companies. We need all those things, all those solutions to be scaled.
Absolutely. And with kind of so many aspects to the transition that needs to happen with climate change, and you mentioned mitigation, which I think is a really important aspect, because we often talk about reduction, but like you said, we're in the situation we're in, we can't change that. We are going to see some really devastating consequences of climate change, especially on those who have done the least to cause it, and sort of the projects that tackle that through the Earthshot Prize playing a really important role in that. Where do you think the future of the Earthshot Prize lies? Is it going to be focused more on the mitigation? I mean, you said it was the yes and, obviously it's going to be both, but where do you think the prize will go in the future to sort of adapt to the changing climate and the changes to this issue that we're going to see coming up?
I think we'll continue to be for the foreseeable future. Some of it will be interesting to see the shape of the innovations that come in to the prize. You know, we have thousands of innovations coming in, and that in itself becomes a kind of Google search engine of solutions, because it's a huge database that we're building where we can start to tease out trends and analysis from even seeing here's where people are starting to spend their time and energy in the problems they're trying to fix. Those are going to change as time goes by. So we will be responsive to what we see coming out of this incredible innovation movement that's unspoken and no one talks about and no one really knows about, but is happening in front of us. It's like a murmuration, right? It's not led by any one person, but there is a murmuration of change happening, and it will teach us where that murmuration of change that sits at the front lines of climate change, where they think the problems are that need to be fixed. So we'll respond to that, knowing also that this last year, 60% of the nominees came from the Global South. So it's going to teach us predictively where the world is going, as much as be a place where we top down go, we want more of this and more of that.
Absolutely. And kind of just to finish on that note, you mentioned that a lot of the projects coming up are coming from the Global South, are coming from the people most impacted. How can we, as everyday people in somewhere like the UK, where we feel a predominantly small kind of consequence of climate change compared to the impact we have, how can we all sort of engage with the ethos of the Earthshot Prize and really help to drive that innovation in everyday life?
Well, I think number one is vote. Number two is every action you take is a decision you've made about the environment. So whether it's your coffee you drink, the clothes you buy, the rent you pay for whatever, the energy provider you get from, all of those matter. Number three is how you decide to spend your working life and what you're going to focus on. Number four is how do you be a part of using market forces to pull excitement and energy and capital towards the innovations that you see coming out of the Earthshot Prize. Like Nopla, who do seaweed-based packaging and plastics, they're at Wimbledon. They've been in all the football stadiums. Go up to the football, if you're going to a football match, go and say, where's your plastic replacement seaweed packaging? Like, be that person that asks that question, and ask it 100 times. Because on the 100th time, someone's going to register that actually you care about it and it matters. So I would say the other thing is optimism is a duty. Adopt a mindset of optimism and urgency and can do. Don't let the denialism and the defeatism seep into your own apathy and turn it into anxiety or apathy or anger. Anger sometimes can be healthy, but apathy and anxiety are not healthy. That narrative of denialism and defeatism is deliberately orchestrated to push you towards apathy. Do not let that force win. Put yourself on the side of urgent optimism, take action, know that you have agency, and champion Earthshot finalists and dream of becoming not an astronaut, but an Earthshot winner.
That's, I think, such an incredibly powerful message to end on. And I love that term with the optimism, the urgent optimism. I think that's a really, really powerful message to end on. So, yeah, thank you so much, Hannah, for this conversation. I think I've learned so much from it, and
Pleasure.
It's been so powerful to hear about your story and about how we can all play such an important role in tackling these issues. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.